Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're, of course, going to have another incredible episode, just like always. And you guys, just like always, are going to be listening to this at its premiere at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at the normal time on Monday. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Today, we've got a great episode, as I said before. And we've got about three different topics I'm going to run through. We may have a short one at the end. A short, brief aside at the end. And the first topic we're going to talk about today is, people are sounding the alarms about whether Republicans are actually going to pull through in November, whether they're actually going to win the midterms. People are freaking out and saying they're not going to win the midterms, or they're not going to do as well in the midterms as they hope for. This opinion was even echoed by Mitch McConnell, who's supposed to be leading the effort and saying Republicans are just going to win. He's supposed to be the chief cheerleader, being the Senate minority leader, being the guy who's probably going to be taking over as Senate majority leader if they take back the Senate. He's supposed to say, yeah, we're going to be doing great. Instead, he's saying, I think we'll win back the House, but he's not sure about the Senate. He thinks it's up in the air about the Senate. He essentially was subtweeting a lot of the candidates, saying, it's on a candidate by candidate basis. So he doesn't have the full confidence in a lot of these Senate candidates. And there's a bunch of polls coming out showing that either Republicans are nationwide polls showing that either Republicans are in a dead heat with Democrats, or Democrats have a very narrow edge all across the nation in these midterms. And, that's very different from a few months ago in the spring where it looked like, Republicans had a massive advantage. And now it looks like the advantage isn't there. And there's also polls coming from the states where even in a state like Florida, where they did a poll of the Senate race there, where Marco Rubio in one poll is behind by 4 points to Val Demings. And you're like, oh, how could that happen? There's also polls showing that J.D. Vance is behind in Ohio. Dr. Oz and the governor, gubernatorial candidate, Mastriano, are both behind in most polling in Pennsylvania. Kerry Lake and Blake Masters are behind in Arizona, according to recent polling. And so you're seeing, and even in Wisconsin, where incumbent Ron Johnson appears to be behind in some polling. So it seems that everyone has this, oh my God, this midterm we thought was gonna be a red wave. It's gonna be a blue wave. It's gonna be a disaster. Republicans are finished, and people always start to panic and lose their minds over this. And even Tucker Carlson had a segment last week saying that Republicans are blowing this, specifically single out Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz seems to be a favorite candidate for everyone to throw their scorn at and be really upset over about how he's throwing away a winnable election. They really just single him out. It's none other, they don't want to single out other individuals, but they always single out Dr. Oz. And he's saying that Republicans have the wrong messaging and need to straighten up and focus on crime and immigration, which I think most people who are listening to this podcast would fully agree with. They need to focus more on our issues instead of talking about, I don't know what maybe the IRS agent angle isn't working as well as they thought they would. The new bill that said the Democrats pushed that would give us 87,000 IRS agents. Every Republican keeps talking about this, from Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy on downward. They keep talking about this. Even when during the Trump raid, they tried to bring in the IRS agent angle. Maybe it's not working as well as they thought it would. So that's all the panic that's coming out. And it's both coming from people from a more America First side and for the moderate side. And, each side is claiming that there's a reason why the Republicans are down. Like, the moderates are saying that there's too many extremist Trumpian candidates, and the America First side says that, the Republicans aren't focusing on the real messages, which is what Tucker was saying. So what is the truth behind this? I think one thing, big picture, that we need to get back, take a step back and look at and see what's going on. I don't really believe the polling right now, or I don't think that the polling is going to be accurate for what's going to happen on Election Day in November. Everyone always gets worked up about this, and there's always this immediate, doom and gloom, it's over, we're finished, pack it up, guys, it's done. People always get into just doomer mode. I think it happened a lot with, even Glenn Youngkin, last year, when it was showing he was ahead in the polls, like people were like, he's going to lose. And I was like, how is he going to lose? It's like, wait for the 3 a.m. ballots. And I'm like, he's got a comfortable lead. I don't think they have enough ballots that they can just drop at 3 a.m. And sure enough, it was right. He won. And people just could not believe that he won. And even when I was like mocking people the next day for being doomer, they then began just like attacking me and still insisting that Republicans somehow lost by winning. I don't know. People are just addicted to pessimism on our side, and they don't want to see this. Not like saying that like winning the midterms is the greatest victory ever, but losing the midterms is a massive black pill, while winning it is just a sign of life. You know, it's like the difference between, you know, a sick patient, like, you know, having no pulse and the patient having a pulse. That is what I would say the midterms. I mean, you have to show that enough Americans are not completely bought into the insanity and are willing to, you know, see what's going on in the country and have a moderate level of voice of voter protest by sending Republicans to control Congress. I think you need that as well. I mean, if Republicans don't take back the Senate, that's some likely scenario. I think if Republicans don't take back the House, that's a real black pill. I think they will. I mean, that even shows in Mitch McConnell's optimism. I mean, most observers think that the Republicans are going to take back the House. It's more of a question of the Senate, which is where all the pessimism is coming from. But let's say the worst case scenario, the Democrats increase their Senate majority and they retain the majority in the House. That is very bad, regardless of whether you think, you know, Republicans are doing anything or what have you. That is a sign that the majority of Americans who actually give a shit are just fine with permanent Democrat rule. But I don't think that's going to happen. I would bet against that. Really, what's going to happen is I still think Republicans are going to gain the majority of the Senate. I still think this is going to be a red wave election. You have to think about this. Like the Florida polls, the Florida polling has been so out of whack. Like I've seen polls that like DeSantis is down. It's like there is no way DeSantis is losing in Florida. If DeSantis loses governorship, that's really bad. Now that's a huge black pill. If they lose both the governor race and the Senate race in Florida, maybe that is a pack it up moment. But I don't think that's going to happen. So like the polling showing, you know, there's supposed to be, I believe, about 5 Senate races where Republicans have the seat, where Democrats could potentially take the seat. We've got Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, Ohio, Portman's retiring, and J.D. Vance is trying to fill that seat. You've got North Carolina, where Richard Burr is retiring, and another guy, Bud, I think. Forgetting these names is trying to take Ted Budd. I'm wanting to say that's the name. Okay, I just looked at it. It is the name. Yeah, I quickly typed out. Yeah, Ted Budd is the name. The guy is a North Carolina congressman. He's running there. That's not getting a lot of attention because it appears that Republicans have that as a safe seat. That's not really being challenged. Florida with Marco Rubio's seat. And the final one is Pat Toomey's seat, which he's retiring from, which Dr. Oz is trying to fill. And those are the 5 seats that Democrats are wanting to take from Republicans. There might be I think they were looking to take one in Iowa and also the one in Missouri, but that's just not even happening. And so there's like 5 potential seats that they could take. Now for Democrats, a lot of the attention is only saying that Republicans can take back 2, and that is in Arizona and Georgia, which they're having problems with. I mean, Herschel Walker is also behind the polls there against Warnock, the current incumbent, Warnock. And that's the 2 seats. But there's also 3 other races that Republicans could pick up that aren't getting as much attention. You have Nevada, you have Colorado, and you have New Hampshire. Recent polls showed that the Republican guy out in Nevada is actually ahead, Laxalt. Colorado, new Washington Post, I'm seeing new reports saying that the guy that they have, who's like a very moderate establishment Republican, is making a very competitive race against Michael Bennet. Michael Bennet, of course, actually I was about to say, of course, but people are not going to remember that he ran for president in 2020. He was like one of those guys who never even made it on the debate stage. I think he might have made it on once or twice, but, he's one of those like, who? This guy's running for president? Yeah, he didn't go anywhere, but he's, that race is a lot closer. And in New Hampshire, that I looked up the Real Clear Politics polling. It's very close there. That could be a sleeper, race. And it's the same in you saw last year in New Jersey where, that's a Democratic stronghold, and Republicans came extremely close to taking that race. So you could see that in New Hampshire, Colorado, and in Nevada, and maybe even a place like Illinois. I don't want to guarantee that, but there's just things that when it's a red wave in a Republican year, that odd things can happen. So but those other three races besides the one in Arizona and Georgia, which are held by Democrats, aren't getting as much attention as you would think, but those are competitive races. So there's about 5 seats there. When it comes to these races, I think of the 5 that Democrats could potentially take, they're not going to win in North Carolina. They're not going to win in Florida. I think J.D. Vance is going to pull out in Ohio. I mean, the polling is starting to go more in his favor. There was a new one put out last week that had him 4 points ahead. He just needs a campaign and get his priorities straight. Trump won that state by 8 points. It's a solid red state. He's not running against an incumbent. He just has to campaign and not be an idiot and start raising money. And Mitch McConnell just put in a ton of money into that race. His super PAC, and the Republican establishment is backing Vance hard in this and just making sure he'll win. They'll pull that out. I don't think they have to worry about it. I think it's really the races that they have to worry about. And if I didn't mention, North Carolina is also going to be safely red. I don't even see that much attention paid to that. I mean, the states you really have to worry are, and all of those 3 states, like Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Trump won all 3 of those states. North Carolina was by the thinnest margin of those 3, but I think in a red wave year that's going to increase. And it's really in the states that he lost that you have to worry about: Pennsylvania and lost and according to the official results, where of course we'll say that Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where they have to really worry about this, especially with Oz. Oz's numbers are not good. But even there, I think that there's going to be a gap that's gonna be narrowed by Election Day. And I would even think that maybe with the exception of Oz, and I think Johnson will still pull it out. They don't have a very good Democrat running against them. They have a weird black guy, I believe, and with the name Mandela Barnes. I think Johnson will still pull it out. Oz is the real question mark. But then it comes to, even if they lose in Pennsylvania, which is not good, they still have 5 other races to pick up from. And I don't think there's going to be a complete 0 out of 5 of those races. I think in Arizona, they're still probably going to win. I think in Georgia, even with Herschel Walker having significant brain damage, is going to still win. And you'll probably see one of those other 3 states, you'll see maybe a surprise victory. So even if they do lose in Pennsylvania, let's say that's the one seat the Democrats gain, I think Republicans will win at least 2 or 3 seats, and that will give them the majority. And I think the main thing you have to realize is that a lot of these polls are, anytime when you're looking at August before elections, the past 2 times in both 2020 and 2021, the elections looked dismal for Republicans. I remember at this time in 2020, there were polls showing that Biden was ahead of Trump by 10 points. Okay. And there was polling showing people Senate candidates Susan Collins in Maine being down by double digits as well, up and even until October. And they was showing just a huge Democrat lead in 2020. And that was a year that was supposed to go well for Democrats. I mean, there was a lot more going for Democrats at that time. The media was really making the entire country hysteric over COVID and blaming Republicans for that. There was just this, we can't deal with this Trump chaos anymore. They're censoring all this negative stuff about Democrats. They were just making it trying their hardest to make it a blue wave election. And Republicans gained seats in the House, and they nearly retained the Senate. And they also nearly retained the White House. And all this, but the polling in August and September showed a Democrat blowout. And we saw this again in 2021, where at this time in August, I remember every reporter was mocking the idea of Glenn Youngkin making a competitive race because all the polling was showing him down by like 9 or 10 points. And they're just like, looks like a competitive race. And of course, he went on to win by, I think, nearly 2 points, or it was exactly 2 points in a blue state. And that's not supposed to happen. And the Republicans almost won in New Jersey. And I think Democrats just don't have anything to run on besides January 6th. The only thing I see changing people a little bit is abortion, but I don't think that that is going to be as significant of a factor as some people may think. And Democrats don't even seem to be running on it as aggressively as you think. And it's one of the few things they have. They're not running on gun control anymore because Republicans neutered that by passing a stupid compromise bill. Still dumb to do, but it really didn't do much. It wasn't as bad as what Democrats were proposing. It took that off the campaign menu. May come back on the campaign trail if there's another mass shooting, but I think for the time being, it's not there. All they really have is abortion and January 6th and threats to democracy. You know, there's like, these polls are so stupid. There's another poll saying that the top concern for Americans is threats to democracy. What the hell does that mean? Like, what, like, do Americans really, I mean, they try to include that, like, Ukraine in there and all these other foreign policy considerations that liberal elite have. And they've put that all in the, like, threats to democracy thing. But I doubt that. I think the economy issue may be losing some of its potency because gas prices are going down. But we're going to hit a full-on recession. I mean, the data shows we're already in a recession, but the full-on recession is going to hit as we proceed into the fall and the winter. People are going to realize this. And Democrats just don't have anything to run on besides January 6th and Ukraine. And no one cares about Ukraine anymore. I was right about this, when I talked when Russia first invaded Ukraine. People were wondering, it's like, oh man, this is going to destroy Republicans in midterms. And I'm like, people are going to forget about this by the midterms. Sure enough, even though we're going to bring up a Ukraine issue next up on the podcast, it's not a major concern for Americans. It's not a factor in the election. People are just talking about autocracy and democracy, and this is like just very media-driven angle. And a lot of these polls are heavily weighted to college-educated adults, which they're only in the 30, like a third of the electorate, maybe a little bit more depending on how the midterms shape up. But there's like some polls where they're like 70% of the people polled. And it's like, okay. And like their concerns are probably that of those who are watching CNN and MSNBC all the time. So they're more worried about the threats to democracy. So I think a lot of the polling you're showing, it's not as much of an effective factor. And even Democrats don't. I mean, the only thing that's changed from when Republicans were just absolutely dominating the polls when it came to midterms, that it looked like a clear and outright red wave, is the abortion decision from the Supreme Court. And I think that has changed it slightly in Democrats' favor, and maybe in a certain, battleground states like Pennsylvania and Georgia, it's maybe helped out Democrats a little bit. But it's not like a major factor that it's gone from just like clear outright red wave to blue wave. I don't think it has enough legs to do that. But it is, I mean, the polling is showing, there's enough polling to show that there's been a change in the American electorate, and it is helping out Democrats, but they're not even aggressively campaigning on it. They're aggressively campaigning on threats to democracy and whatever that means. And that's really more that angle. And I just don't think that's going to play out well in this election cycle. I don't think it's going to be the political winner that they think it is. And it's going to, it's not going to be the factor. So I think if you're looking at these polling right now and people are already like running to the exits and, it's over, everyone's always like, it's over. People love to indulge in their pessimism. I don't think that that's the case. I think it's going to be still a red wave. It might not be as big of one as we thought it would have been in April, but I would still bet on, I think everyone would bet on them taking the House. And worst case scenario, they lose 2 seats in the Senate, which would still be bad. But if they have the House And that House Republicans are way more unified in opposing Democrat stuff than they were, 10 years ago. Democrats are just not going to pass anything. So even if they do have a Senate majority, a thin Senate majority, it's not going to matter as much as you would think. The main point is that they don't want to pass any bills. Having that Senate majority is a sign that, Republicans still have a lot more potency and they have a powerful message. It's a good thing for us to take back the Senate, but it's not the end of the world if they don't take back the Senate. They don't fail to take back the House, that's a different story. But I don't think that's going to happen under any circumstance. I would still bet that they would take back the Senate, but it may just be by 1 seat or 2 seats. When, if you're looking back in April, you may have thought that it could have been up to 5 seats. This could still happen. That could still happen. I wouldn't bet on that though, but it could still happen. And that's just what the case. But I think one thing that needs to be reminded is that people like Tucker Carlson, they're all, and people on our side who are complaining about this, is that Republicans are running on the closest thing to an America First message any time in my lifetime. I have never seen Republicans campaigning on our issues. You have guys, major candidates running on immigration restriction. You have guys who are running ads about the border crisis. You have people who are talking about crime. You do have people who are bringing attention to this issue. That's not everyone. Dr. Oz isn't really doing that. He could change that if he listens to Tucker. But a lot of candidates are doing it. If you look at nationwide at what candidates are running on, a lot of them are running on Trump, support for Trump. A lot of them are hostile to the FBI. They are running on close. If you look at a nationwide picture, and a lot of these high-profile cases, Republicans are largely running on an America First message. So if Republicans lose, it's going to be a repudiation of America First ideas rather than a repudiation of establishment timidity. I probably mispronounced that, but it's not a highly respected until I mispronounce things. The timidness of the establishment. I don't think that's going to be the angle. The angle is going to be that this is a rejection of Trumpism and America First. And what Republicans need to do is move on from Trump and just pick someone who's more moderate friendly. And that's what they're going to go with. That's still not going to happen for 2024, but that would be the accepted angle and conclusion from the election if Republicans don't win. It's not going to be that they need to go further on America First ideas. It's going to be that they need to reject America First ideas, which is not going to happen. There's still going to be a battle over that into 2024 and in those primaries and people running on Trumpian America First ideas and style. But you will see people who will claim that, and that will be the Republican establishment's takeaway and the media's takeaway. And I think there are two things that I think Republicans probably need to worry about when it comes to general election messaging. I do think that the stuff dwelling on the 2020 election, while it is important and it's definitely important for Republican primaries, I do think that is, and it comes to a general election, I do think that is not a political winner. I think that was part of the reason why Trump-backed candidates did horribly actually in Georgia, is that a lot of the electorate just wants to move on. I think that's also the case with January 6th. I think that people just want to move on. It's both, obsession with January 6th of threat to democracy, also the obsession with the 2020 election. People, I think, majority of Americans just want to move on. And if people are just focusing in on that, they're going to vote for their opponent. And I think that might be more of a factor than the abortion thing. I think this is unfortunate. I don't think, one thing, if the laws that were in place and the type of loose mail-in ballot regulations, laissez-faire, just accept them all, if those policies are kept in place for the foreseeable future, that's going to make it very hard for Republicans to ever win elections again. So they do need to solve that, as they did in Georgia with their election reform and a couple of other states. But if that stuff stays in place for the foreseeable future, that's going to hurt Republicans. So they do need to do a lot on election reform, but excessively focusing on the 2020 election. And this is not my personal opinion. I just think that this is what we're seeing from the general election. I think that is going to be that is not a political winner, and that will probably be a problem for Trump for 2024. Of course, this highly respected is of course swears undying fealty to Trump, but I do think that will be probably Trump's biggest hurdle for 2024 is the obsession with the 2020 election and how the general electorate is really gets turned off by that stuff. But I mean, the base is still into it. But I don't think many of these candidates are going to be running with that line in the general election. I think they're smart enough not to do it. And that's more of an issue for 2024, I think. And so when these elections happen, I don't think people should panic. I think you really need to take a big picture of elections. I learned this lesson in the 2020 primary is that or Democrat primaries, you really need to take a step back and look at it from the big picture rather than just like there's a new update on these polls. Oh, somebody's pulling ahead. This person's going to be the next presidential nominee. And I fell for it for the 2020 primary when in fact, at the start of it, I think this is in April of 2019, I predicted the election, but I didn't stick with that prediction. I said, just looking at this big picture of what was happening, the field, I was saying Bernie Sanders was the strongest candidate and that he, in having a large field, was to his benefit because he was going to stand out and all these other people were going to be competing over the not Bernie vote and this would help him. But I said the worst thing that could happen to him is if they unify behind one non-Bernie candidate and if he went head-to-head, he would lose. And sure enough, that's what happened in the election, is that Bernie, was the strongest candidate. Everyone was predicting Bernie was going to be the nominee. Then Joe Biden won the South Carolina primary, and Buttigieg and Klobuchar dropped out, endorsed Biden, and then they all united behind Biden. And in a head-to-head race, Bernie, of course, could not win, and Bernie lost. And so I predicted that early on, but I kept, was tuned into the news cycle all the time. It's like, oh, Elizabeth Warren's getting ahead. For a long time I thought Elizabeth Warren was, I don't know if I tweet about this, but I definitely in private and with friends and stuff, I would say like, oh, Elizabeth Warren looks like the real candidate. And sometimes I even wondered like, oh, the unity non-Bernie candidate could be Kamala. Kamala went nowhere. Sometimes I even thought Cory Booker. I don't know if I tweeted this stuff, but it was like everyone's like tuned into the cycle just to looking at the polling from a day-to-day basis. And also I discounted Biden. I thought Biden, I knew how Biden was before he entered the race. So this guy had, he was senile to an extent. He was going to make a ton of gas. He just could not compete in a modern Democratic field. But the polling always showed him as a strong candidate. But I disputed that. And I just didn't refuse to believe in it. So you really have to look at this in a big picture. You really have to look at what bellwether elections they were last year in 2021, where Republicans won big in Virginia, which is everyone thought was a solid blue state now, and nearly won in New Jersey. You have to look at like that Texas special election where Republicans won a Hispanic majority district with Maya Flores, who's not turned out to be that great as people thought she would be. And you look at those things, and you look at just the general state of America and the level of enthusiasm for the current state of America, and those are all disfavored Democrats. And you have to look at the larger message of what Democrats are running for. And some people want to complain. It's like, well, the Republicans don't have that clear message. I mean, just by not being Democrats, that's a much better message than Democrats or Republicans would have, and they are campaigning a lot on our interests. I think they could campaign more on crime. I think they do need to make crime a bigger issue. And they do need to bring the border invasion much more to the fore. I mean, we set a record. We got 2 million migrants crossing. Those are just the ones we apprehended. There's like at least another 500,000, maybe closer to 1 million who got away, who we never apprehended. And a lot of these migrants stay here because of Biden policies. And I think there's some things that they can emphasize more, but largely they're pretty close to what we want. They need to do a little bit more. And I still think that this is going to be a Republican election. Come November, if it's not, I think there's bigger issues than my faulty political predictive analysis. And I think there's much bigger problems than that. But I think if you guys like, it's maybe not time to be that upset or that worried and freaking out and taking doom pills about it. Well, some people may not even care about it, but I think if to reiterate a point, or the conclusion of this, to conclude on this, is that I think Republicans will take back the House and Senate. Extremely confident they're going to take back the House. If Republicans do not take back, I don't, it's not the end of the world if they don't take back the Senate, but if they do not take back the House, this is really bad political situation, and I would take that as a sign that Republicans cannot win in 2024 if they do not take back the House. Like, that is a huge red alert, like siren going off if that happens. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they're going to take back the House, and they will take back the Senate, and a lot of this stuff that we've been worrying about in August are going to look pretty silly come the time of post-election analysis. And that's just what I think that's a good point to emphasize. If you compare this to 2021 and 2020, and it's looking a lot better than the elections were looking at those times in August at that time. So that's my thoughts on that. Now moving on to the other current events. Now it's going to be a foreign policy event. I think this is a big Twitter story, even though I don't think that this is as big as some people on Twitter are saying, is that Aleksandr Dugin's daughter was assassinated in a car bomb in Moscow over the weekend, which is a very bizarre event. It's like, why are they targeting Aleksandr Dugin's daughter? And this has just really riled up people on Twitter, both from people who are really pro-Ukraine, who are celebrating the murder of a random Russian's daughter, to the right, worrying that this might be the start of World War III, who's behind this. And so there's a lot of details. So we'll go into that for a bit. I don't think... This is a very weird story, but I don't think it's as important as people think. First off, Dugin is not as important as the Western media thinks. If you look at any of the Russian nationalists and how they're talking, or any people who are in Russia, Dugin is not that big of a deal. He's like, he goes on TV occasionally. He's not... he's not Putin's brain. He's not the architect of the Ukraine war, which is like what CNN headlines are saying, or, the mastermind of this. He is not any of those things. He is simply a guy who has a public platform, and, some people read him, but it's, I'm trying to think of a good comparison for America. It's, some people would just say it's like the comparison between Richard Spencer and Donald Trump, between Putin and Dugin, but I wouldn't go that far. And also, Dugin is still pro-Putin, which Spencer is not. I wouldn't go that far. But there are like several similar figures. You could maybe say it's like Michael Anton. Even going same with Michael Anton. Michael Anton has a closer connection to Trump, and Trump world reads him, which I don't even think Putin world reads him. I would just be like a random alt-right person. Maybe me. It's like Scott Greer is Trump's brain. I wish that were true, but that's not true. And so if they try to assassinate me, blow me up, they would be like, wow, they blew up the mastermind behind Trump's saying coal. Maybe if that happened. But that would be the comparison. He's not that important of a figure in Russia. He's not controlling the shots. He is just a guy who just appears on TV. Some of the major papers run his columns, but he's not that important of a figure. And it is very weird for him to, them try to target him for assassination, for whatever reason that they had. And it is, it is bizarre, but he has such a huge name recognition among Western observers of Russia that they've been calling him Putin's brain for years, since I think, at least in the Western media, since at least 2013. I definitely during the Ukraine war in 2014, he was a big deal. They kept talking about him, and it was weird at that time because people who had been reading alt-right publications and stuff, they're like, hey, we know this guy. This guy's been published in our areas, and now we see him being talked about in mainstream news publications. Wow, that's crazy. But of course, the dissident right has largely turned on Dugin since that time due to some of his other beliefs. And so he's not as popular as he was pre-Ukraine war. So the start of it, I mean, they are right. I mean, a lot of people have a lot more criticisms of him now. So, but he's never been that important. And even during the Ukraine war, he was sacked from his, professorship at the Moscow State University, and he was not like he didn't really have a position of authority. He's just like a guy who like talks and some people read him, but it's like it's the amount of elite readership for him is overstated. He's certainly not Putin's brain or anything like that. So why would they target him? Well, they really view Dugin as like this evil, like nationalist that they want to kill, and some of the Russian far right really hates him, particularly from the neo-Nazi scene. And a lot of those guys have signed up for the Ukrainian cause, and they hate him for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's a similar what you would say. It's like that doesn't make any sense from an outside observer, and seeing all these like internecine feuds among like the American far right, it'd be similar in the Russian far right. And so who would kill him? But it's like Ukrainian intelligence. I mean, Russian intelligence is saying that the person who killed him was a woman, or killed her, Daria Dugina, was a woman who was a member of Azov. She had traveled to Russia with what purportedly was her daughter. May not have been her daughter. Might have just been a young girl she brought along with her. They followed her around in a Mini Cooper, and they set off a bomb at some point in the car. And maybe they thought that Dugin was in the car, but it was just his daughter. And they had fled to Estonia after the assassination. That's what Russian intelligence says. I think that there's going to be so many theories. I mean, Ukraine loves to blame everything atrocity on Russia itself. Like, if their own cities in Donbass get shelled, like from in Donetsk or Luhansk, or I'm not even trying to pronounce the name, but like Donetsk, or even the Russian cities that like get bombed and stuff, they blame the Russians. I think there was even something in like Crimea where there was like some shelling or bomb. And they tried at first to blame the Russians. So anything bad, and also there's been some POW camps shelled, and Ukraine has blamed the Russians. So they blame the Russians for everything because they know that Western media will buy any ridiculous thing that the Ukrainians say, from the ghost of Kiev to the old lady who knocked down a drone with a pickle jar. People will believe any bullshit the Ukraine shovels their way. And so if they wanted to blame Russia's state intelligence for this, they could. But why would Russian intelligence kill like a daughter of Aleksandr Dugin? They don't really care about this. And it's not like the Russian people really admire or revere Dugin to the extent that they would support the war even more. They wouldn't do that. So it's definitely the theory, and it probably would be CIA because they're like, this is like a needless provocation. That's like stupid. This guy isn't even that important. Why would we do this? So the only people who are like crazy enough to do this are definitely people backed by Ukrainian intelligence. And I first had thought it might have been like Russian neo-Nazis who got into the country, or Ukrainian guys who got in the country affiliated with these militias who got in the country and were wanting to take revenge. And there's been a ton of Ukrainian immigrants who've come into this country since the war started. They got involved, undetected through the masses coming across. Got it, and they decided that they really hated Dugin. They have a real grudge against him for what he said about Ukraine, and it's just like a chief rival, and they know that it's easier to get to him than, say, top government officials. Not the type, no security detail at all around him, so they just decided to send a message to him. But whoever it is, I mean, the Russian FSB explanation, not like you should believe everything they say, but what they've come up is like extremely plausible, and I doubt it's correct. Whether it's directly ordered by Ukraine or not, I mean, Ukraine's never going to admit it, but Ukraine really does like this stuff. I mean, they don't have a full control over all their forces. Like, they don't have a control over the militias. They don't exert, I guarantee you they don't even exert control over their security services. Like the political leadership, they just kind of do whatever they want. And some of these people may be like, let's take revenge on some of these Muscali assholes. And they're like, how about we try to kill Dugin? And they're like, yeah, let's do that. And they just killed his daughter. And it's not like there's any recrimination over this or regret over this. I mean, all the Ukrainian supporters like, this is awesome. This is what you get, Muscali. And they ran with this. They're all celebrating the death of the daughter. And Visegrad 24, one of the worst accounts on this website that's like run from Poland. It's like always promoting Eastern European interests. Before the Ukraine war was like promoting like anti-immigration stuff. Now it's just promoting anti-Russia stuff. And they were celebrating the death as like necessary because Dugin's daughter did not reject Dugin's hate, thus that made her a legitimate target. And they're like, yeah, this is what's deserved. And it's like, no, it's like it's so ridiculous that we could just see, and like even mainstream figures like Julia Yaffe and others were celebrating as like when you sowing the whirlwind, and that's what that's their argument that they're claiming. So no, Ukraine could just like execute Russian POWs en masse on video camera, and their Western supporters would be like, epic, post this on Reddit upvotes, and so they can do terrorism for Reddit upvotes, and nobody's going to care. It's not like America's going to care that they did this. So it's likely that Ukraine did it because there's no like possible backlash from anyone who matters or supports them to this. And they are crazy people who want, I mean, a lot of, especially in the militias and stuff, they do. I mean, they've already been committing war crimes openly on camera against Ukrainian or Russian POWs. So they just don't care. And if they want to turn, and they may feel that the only thing that they can really hurt the Russians is by doing terrorism in Russia. And so maybe they think that like this, we can, really attack the propagandists behind the war and send them a message. And that's what we're going to do. So I think this will be probably the start of probably more similar attacks, unless Russia really cracks down on it or tries to stop it. But I think you're going to see more of these type of attacks. I don't think it's not going to stop the war effort. It's going to more encourage the war effort and even more. So it's backfiring. It does backfire, but it is like a very vicious war now, and it's going to continue to slog on. And going along with like the Western perception of Ukraine is like, I need to do a new episode soon, probably within the next month, of an update on what's going on in Ukraine, because I mean it's out of the public picture except for this. But I mean the public still believes that like Ukrainians are winning. And they had a successful counteroffensive in Kherson when there was no counteroffensive at all. And they're just like, oh, we were just tricking the Russians. And they had put so much propaganda value in them counterattacking in the Kherson district and trying to take Kherson, which is, it's away from Donbass. It's like, it's north of Crimea, directly north of Crimea. And they instead have lost ground in that territory due to their counteroffensive, and they just have no offensive capability whatsoever. I mean, Ukraine's been bragging about how they have offensive capability. It was supposed to come out in Kherson, and it was a complete failure. And they just said, "Oh, we were just joking. It's not happening." And they continue to lose ground, and they're continuing to lose a ton of casualties in Donbass. The war was definitely not going in Russia's favor at start because they were trying to do too many things, and like the local population around Kiev and elsewhere, they were not there. But now they're sticking to the areas where there's much more of at least an indifferent or sympathetic attitude towards Russia. I mean, even Ukrainian soldiers complain about this. They're like, yeah, all the villagers in our area are giving away our location to the Russians. They hate us. You can watch a ton of interviews with Ukrainian soldiers stationed on the Donbass front, and they always complain about the locals siding with the Russians. And, they're losing a ton of people, and I don't think Russia's casual, and Russia's doing a slow grind against Ukraine, and I think in a way to minimize their own casualties while they're, the casualties of Ukrainians are just through the roof. And they're losing a lot of their combat effective soldiers and officers. So it's a lot of these guys that they're putting on the front in the trenches are just total cannon fodder without much training, without the proper weapons. And so it's a very tragic war. I mean, hopefully peace is made soon, but I don't think even peace will be made soon because Ukrainian leadership is making so much money from this. I mean, all the money we're sending to Ukraine, they're of course taking their cut. Most of the weaponry is not being received by the Ukrainian troops on the front line, as even CBS report, I think it was CBS or ABC, one of the major networks, did a report saying that like only 30% is getting to the Ukrainian front lines. Only just imagine where that money's going. So the Ukrainian leadership is making a ton of money and being treated as like the most noble leaders in human history. for opposing Russia. So there's no reason for them to end the war. And the only people who probably want an end to the war is Europe. I mean, I think Russia at this point thinks that as time goes on, they can take over more of Ukraine. So maybe they don't want the war to end too soon, because I think they realize they can gain a lot more territory without much cost, or without the type of cost that they were incurring early in the war by the way they're waging it now. But I mean, it's really just going to be Europe, because Europe's going to be freezing this winter and it's going to have really bad problems if the war drags on. So we'll have to see, but we'll do an update on Ukraine soon. I'll have Tannen back on the podcast to discuss this topic and more. So be on the lookout for that. I'll try to have one soon. Maybe if there's like a big offensive or something and there's a worthwhile update from what I've talked about today, and we'll do something on that. So be on the lookout for that. And so now we're going to go to our next topic, which is actually our cognitive elite section, because 2 different people asked about this subject. And I was already planning on talking about it, but 2 people just brought it up. So it's now our cognitive elite section, because this is 2 different questions. And as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the highly respected cognitive elite option at highly respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there if you haven't already. And so if you sign up for the cognitive elite option, you can get the power to ask me questions and suggest guests and topics. And so today we had 2 people ask this question, both coming from Johnny Chungus and Cargo Shorts Respecter. Cargo Shorts Respecter is still in the cognitive elite, even though he did not disavow me over my pro-Greek life stances. So we have to thank Cargo Shorts Respecter for that. Both of them asked for what is my opinion on Andrew Tate. And I am so glad that they asked this, because I was planning an epic segment on this. And so both of them asked for my opinion on Andrew Tate and why he's just taken over the internet. And so that is going to be the subject for the rest of the podcast, unless you may have a quick aside before we end, but that's what's going on at the moment. So now for Andrew Tate. For those who may not know, Andrew Tate is an internet sensation. He is a former professional kickboxer who has now turned into a influencer, masculinity influencer, self-help guy. He runs some business, or he runs a university, Hustlers University. This is actually really the solution to the college program, is like, should I go to college or not? Maybe just sign up for Hustlers University, which he teaches ways how to make money online. There's a ton of stuff about that. And he has gotten big because his clips of him from his YouTube channel or from his podcast, or just like random clips he's had, have just gone viral on TikTok. A lot of kids, like really young kids, like teenagers and middle schoolers, have gotten really into his stuff, because he's always talking about like how to be a masculine man and owning women. And these things have just like taken off over, he is everywhere on TikTok, and he was everywhere on, he's very prominent on Instagram and Facebook up until he was banned from Instagram and Facebook. He still has his YouTube channel, but he is not allowed on Facebook and Instagram. And he got his Twitter account banned a long time ago, in like 2017. I remember Andrew Tate from back then. I remember him as like a kind of a little over the top Trump guy who was getting retweeted by Cernovich and Poso and people like that at the time. Paul Joseph Watson was like their friends. And he got banned for, I think, attacking Me Too and stuff, and calling women fat. He just had a lot of over-the-top comments. Sometimes it's like funny, sometimes it's a little too much, but whatever. He was definitely a character on Twitter, and I have not heard his name in a long time. And then I heard he got arrested for allegations of sexual impropriety, like they were claiming like sex trafficking in the spring. It appears that no formal charges were brought against him over that. I think it's still being investigated. So, innocent until proven guilty. So we'll have to look into that. I'm not going to speculate on what's going on there, but I don't think there's been formal charges brought in that case. And that was the time I heard about him. I was like, oh, I forgot about that guy. And then like a month or 2 months later, it's like he is everywhere. And like, wow, this guy is really blown up. This is all everyone wants to talk about, and mainstream media is talking all about him. They can't get enough, and it is like, and like there's a bunch of teachers who are making TikToks about the negative influence he's having over young boys in their class. There's even kids. Somebody sent me a screenshot of they were watching the Little League World Series, and if you ever watch like the Little League World Series and stuff, I mean, ESPN has been playing that for years and years. I remember, like, you know, it'd be like they'd play it on like a Saturday when nothing else was on TV, and I don't even remember like watching it for a few minutes. And even back then, they had the same. It's like the same program as it was like when I was watching it 20 years ago. And they'd always ask this kid, "Is like, what's your favorite role model and stuff?" And usually it'd be back then it would have been like a great football player, you know, it'd been like Peyton Manning, or, you know, great baseball player like Derek Jeter, somebody like that, or just whatever popular entertainers were at the time. And they've always done this. And the kid put down his role model is Andrew Tate. And you're like, let's get a keyed. Can I get a keyed in here? So I guess it's like could go into like, what are my thoughts on Andrew Tate, pro or negative? Before I go into a longer spiel about comparing him to another figure that a lot of people like to compare him to is Dave Portnoy and Barstool Sports. Which I think I made a joke about this, is like tired Barstool conservatives, wired Andrew Tate conservatives. So pro or negative, I would say I'm mostly pro Andrew Tate. I think like him as an individual, there's of course sketchy elements about Andrew Tate. You know, he is like a lot of what his business ventures are. I don't think anyone would just consider as like noble. You know, there are allegations. I think he's like a OnlyFans manager. I don't think there's any way you're like, wow, that's awesome. Even like the Hustlers to You, not as sketchy as that, but still like maybe not the best thing. But there's like so many people doing like that. But I would say like the main thing that people are getting from him is not like being an OnlyFans manager or even the Hustlers You stuff, is what they're seeing on TikTok. And generally what they're seeing on TikTok is a lot of this. It's a lot of dissident right content, and it's a lot of stuff. If you guys remember, you may be a little bit too old for this. Harkens back to the older days of the POA blogs, pickup artist blogs, and like the better ones, more like Artis and Royce, and even like old Roosh. And it's really bringing that type of content that is also like verges onto dissident right content when it talks about like larger social issues besides dating and gender relations. And he is bringing that to the entire huge young audience, because his videos are reaching millions and millions of people on TikTok. It is far bigger than anything in the right-wing Twitter sphere that you can get. Even like most conservatives, like, you know, the type of reach that he's getting with his videos would be, you know, Ben Shapiro tier. But I mean, I don't even think that stuff is getting as big on TikTok. So it may exceed all other type of conservative personalities when it comes to TikTok. And TikTok is the preeminent youth social media platform at the moment. Conservatives have struggled to get on there a lot because they don't like TikTok, because they see it as a Chinese subversion. There's a point there, or there's, you know, it's weird. They haven't figured out, you know, they're like 30 and they're figuring out how to win over Zoomers with TikTok, and it doesn't work. I mean, Tate is everywhere, and like there's like teenager kids who don't know much about politics who are just like, I think Andrew Tate rules. And a lot of what the teachers are complaining about Andrew Tate is not like that he's like you know, a scumbag or something like that, or how he makes his money is weird. It's that he's teaching young men or young boys that, you know, they need to be masculine, that they need to, you know, insist on proper gender roles, that they need to, you know, it's all right to exert authority and dominance as a male. And it's also skepticism of women. Like, and you have to remember is like people want to attack him, and I think there's like fair criticisms to make of Andrew Tate, but you have to look at what the alternatives are. All the other alternatives are, and a lot of people made jokes about this on Twitter, is like all the other alternatives for young boys is about turning them trans and making and neutering them. There is not like a positive male role model for and I'm not even wanting to say that Tate is necessarily that positive male role model, but it's not like there is a better alternative. There's not like, say, a really popular Christian guy who is like a huge sensation on to young men, and he's teaching like young boys like how to be a real like Christian man or something. There's not that really that alternative that has the type of popularity on TikTok. It's like, and if you look at like the, and I'll go into this when I'm talking about Barstool, is if you look at the other alternatives on like TikTok and social media that these kids are getting, they're getting like sissy hypno. They're getting these like horrible stuff about, you know, white privilege and like all these other entertainers that they're getting. A lot of them are just like rappers, and others who are just like teaching how they need to be a gangbanger, and all their terrible are just like that they need to be, you know, they need to change their gender, and they are bombarded with horrible messaging whenever they go onto social media. And out comes a guy who is telling them both gender realism, I like that term, sexual realism. You may, and I think going into the far of like engaging in sexual promiscuity is another matter. But I think a lot of what he's saying about how men and women interact in the relationships and what women want and what men want and how women respect women, a lot of that comes, even you can disagree or condemn his stance on like, you know, using that to be promiscuous and live a sinful lifestyle, if you will. But you can still see what he's saying and learn that that's like the truth. And generally what their other parts of society is telling them is gender bullshit. Is like what they tell them is like, first off, it doesn't exist. What women want is they want like a neutered, nice guy who's like, oh, thank you. And is like a total bitch, and no one's going to respect them. And you have Andrew Tate who's like telling them like what like actual gender realism. And he's even talking about race realism. Is that there was an account on Twitter who is showing all of his takes on immigration, on race. He was even dismissing the idea that like racism is a real thing. He's like, a lot of what you call racism is just pattern recognition. It is actually seeing behavior before you and then making logical conclusions, but society then says that that's racist. He's also praised Hungary and other countries. He's warned about demographic replacement. He said that his major issues are just immigration and putting your nation first. He also had an incredibly base clip about the military, about whether you should join. And he's like, you could probably disagree with this, but I think there's a point there where he's saying that like you sign up for the military to get shot at by a guy whose cousin is going to be led into your country, and if you have a problem with that, they're going to censor you on Facebook. And then this guy runs over 10 people with a car, and if you complain about that, you can be arrested. And this is what you're fighting for. Like, what the hell? What are you risking your life for here when they're letting all these people into your country? And you're like, man, most conservatives wouldn't even go that far. That's like some red-pilled stuff, as you would say. And those type of clips are reaching a massive audience. So they like see like people just want to watch Andrew Tate content, and maybe they're just focusing on the like make money stuff, or like maybe the like him talking about like relationships or how to be a real man. But then they could come across these clips of him just saying things that are verboten in the rest of society about immigration, demographics, like free speech, how we interact as a society, race realism. And yeah, it's also, it's like make a point, like Andrew Tate himself, it would not be is not necessarily a white guy. He is mixed race, so it's not like it is a way that he can get away from being avoid being called a racist, I guess. But he is like engaging and spreading dissident right talking points that to a massive audience at this moment. And the reason why they hate him is because he talks about inconvenient truths, as he talks about uncomfortable truths. He's not simply just a guy who's like, get laid, party, have a good time. You know, there's a ton of people like that, and the system does not try to censor them. And there's some other tawdry stuffs about that. I'm not going to like defend that. I mean, even his story about the sex trafficking thing, I mean, he has, I don't know whether the explanation is true or not, but it was like saying that like the girl who complained said it was like her boyfriend was like called to complain, and then when it came out, like they showed evidence that it was like clearly she was there on her free will. The stuff, even I don't know what the story is about that. The stuff about the beating, there was like one clip that was shown like beating women. It's like clearly it was like consensual act. Like the woman was like calling him a pussy and it's like telling him to hit her harder, and you're like, I mean, certainly not upstanding moral behavior, maybe, but like on the level of abusing women or just like something criminal, I'd probably not say that. It's like whatever. And there's like so many worse things. Is like you see that a lot of these like PUA bloggers like become big on Twitter and stuff, and like you know, and in the Twitter sphere, it's like very much different from the rest of American society, where it really does emphasize a type of sexual puritanism that, and it's not, I'm not necessarily complaining, I'm just pointing this out, that is not found elsewhere in society. And so it's funny that like if you, and I keep bringing up Barstool. I'll actually keep this point I'll expand on this point when I'm talking about Barstool and talking about the massive gap between Twitter, right-wing Twitter sphere versus normie America on that. So even with the tawdry aspects about Tate, and you could even say that like the tawdry aspects is like, this also applies to Trump. Trump cheated on his wives. Like Trump is not a virtuous person when it comes to sexual morality. All the same complaints you can make about Andrew Tate, and Trump has also been accused of sexual misconduct by many different women. A lot of it is bullshit, of course, like with Stormy Daniels and others. And we still see him as our best candidate. And it's like you can't necessarily when this comes, it's like a lot of these people are not going to be 100% morally virtuous. A lot of these people, we could imagine that there could be a much better person to do this. But those are not the people who are out there who are spreading that message. And when it comes to Tate, I think, and what young people are coming into contact with, all the type of messages that they're going to be seeing from TikTok and YouTube and everywhere else that they're logged in on social media, they're going to be seeing far worse messages, far more degenerate messages. Everything that we oppose, they're getting brainwashed on a day-to-day basis. And the only person who's going to give them a degree of realism and a degree of truth is Andrew Tate, for better or for worse. And I think that's why you necessarily need to be positive of him. I don't think if he came to the situation of this guy is just a big Twitter user and he's just reaching people on Twitter, I think we would have a different standard. But he is passed into a different sphere and reaching millions and millions of people we can't reach, or who are not listening to our content. So there's a different standard. It's the same with like Trump. It's like there is a different standard for Trump than there is for a guy who's just like a big account on Twitter. Like very different standards of behavior and conduct and what we expect from them. And I think that's the same with Andrew Tate. And that's why I'm like, compared to the Barstool phenomenon, which I keep alluding to, he is far superior to them. I mean, there's like reasons to be skeptical. I don't think you need to be like 100% like Andrew Tate fan, but for what he is doing and the message that he's getting and the fans he's reaching with which it is like a dissident right message. Maybe he's of course not the perfect vessel for that message, but he is the vessel that is there, and there's not going to be just like some replacement we have. Like I see like a lot of these quote unquote post-liberals, common good conservatives who are really attacking him. Like Compact Magazine, which I've criticized in articles before, has had at least 2 articles criticizing Andrew Tate. One article came out in favor of feminism. It said feminism is really conservative. Like, what? Okay, no, Andrew Tate is much better than feminism. This is stupid. Anytime that there's like a guy like this, they're just like, this is horrible. We need to put it. It's like, what are you going to put out there? Like Patrick Deneen on TikTok? Like, hello, kids, I'm a professor. Oh, I'm going to teach you how to be cool. And to be cool is to read this really boring 1,000-page book on being a man. And this is so exciting. Like, no fucking 13-year-old is going to be like, wow, this is so cool. I really think Patrick Deneen is way cooler than Andrew Tate. Like, Andrew Tate knows how to reach this audience. He is like, and people think of him as cool. And so when he says dissident right messages, more of those people who are listening to him, watching his clips, are going to be introduced to these ideas that they've never heard before. And there's not a replacement vessel. There's not a replacement to him. There's not going to be like, well, you know, he sucks. Let's do this again with another person on TikTok. With who? Like, I mean, I know a lot of conservative ink and populist ink types are going to be, but it's like, who are they going to get? Like Spencer Clavin, Dave Reboy? Like, who are these people they expect? Is like, we're going to show them a better example for masculinity. No, that person's not going to have the same level of success. There's like a type of like entertaining, hilarious content. A lot of his content is just over the top. It's funny. And like watching the clip of him roasting Scott Adams for his wife leaving him, it's a very mean clip, but it's very funny. And that's like what a lot of these kids are getting into. And it is far better media or messaging and content that they would get otherwise. I probably would not recommend them to sign up for Hustler's U or to emulate how he makes his money. And there is like a crassly materialistic, obsessed with money aspect to him. That's the way with all these masculinity dudes. And compared to them, he's at least aware of other problems in the world and is willing to speak out about it. And even when he's like, his interview with Barstool Sports is really illustrative of the difference between him and bro culture that is best represented by Barstool. So now I'm going to get into Barstool. And I'm going to first start off with is that if you really want to understand the Tate phenomenon, I recommend watching the interview with him and Barstool Sports. And I would actually recommend watching the full episode where he's not on it the whole time. There's like 20 minutes of them, of Dave Portnoy and the host of the show, BFFs. They have like a million different podcasts. Like I'm learning like that. I did a lot of research on Barstool over the weekend for this podcast. All the work I do for you guys, and I went down a normie rabbit hole and I was wanting to get out of it. But they had Andrew Tate on. Tate comes on, and there's like, you generally can find the 15-minute clips of him talking about women and gender relations. And when he's talking about this, they just can't understand someone believing this stuff. They're like, him just saying men have different intelligence levels. Like there is a nature versus nurture. It's like there is a way that men are going to be naturally better at things that women are not going to be capable of. And he kept using this airline pilot. If you're going into a storm, you'd much rather have a male pilot. And even Dave Portnoy and all the other guest hosts are like that. They have like two women, and they're like, "That's so stupid. How could you believe that?" Like I don't know. Like men and women are the same. And Dave Portnoy's like, "Oh man, I don't know about that. I'm gonna Google this." And he's like, Google intelligence, and he's like talking about how men are more likely to be more intelligent, that they're going to be better control of their emotions and more rational, and you'd want them more in a crisis situation. People with common sense would agree with that, but due to Barstool having to kowtow to the progressive line, they're not going to go along with that. And it really just shows that like the whole show before he got on, like was completely inane. Like I watched a bunch of Barstool podcasts over the weekend, and one thing to realize is like the right-wing Twitter sphere really sees OnlyFans, and it's really just the right in general, sees OnlyFans as the end of civilization. Rightfully so. I can't as one of the worst things in our society. Barstool, which there's been this popularity of Barstool conservatives, which is not entirely a new thing, is like conservatives and Republican apparatchiks have loved Barstool for a long time. I remember this working in conservative media. Like guys would just love bringing up Barstool. They would love to put like a Barstool sticker on their laptop, and they would just like, the Barstool was their type of culture and the thing that they like to do. And it's like their way of just showing like, I'm a cool guy. I'm kind of edgy. I'm into Barstool. And this is the type of thing that they liked. And a lot of these guys some of them were like devoutly Christian. Some of them were not. And it was like all over the place with it. And Barstool, like watching these podcasts, I tried to find them podcasts of them talking about OnlyFans, because in this podcast prior to Andrew Tate coming on, the BFFs, they talk about OnlyFans. And when they talk about OnlyFans, they're like, there's some woman who's making $1 million off it. Like all the celebrity figures and entertainment figures that they talk about, I really learned I'm not down with the culture, because I'm like, I don't know half these people. Like they talk about Doja Cat. I was like, all right, I'm sort of familiar with Doja Cat. And there's like, maybe that's like the only person they talked about that I really knew. And there's like a Jets quarterback that they talked about as well, who had like a slight familiarity with. And they just talk about some woman. She's like making $1 million, and they're liking this, and they're not like horrified by this, but they're just like this. And then like he talks to one of the other young male hosts who's like 20 years old, and this guy is like total Zoomer wigger type kid. He used to have the like Zoomer perm too. Is now it's a more normal white kid hair now, but not quite the perm. And he's like talking about this. And Dave Portnoy just like casually talks about it as like, oh, do you subscribe to this girl's OnlyFans? Not like as a joke, or it's actually not Portnoy who does it. It's one of the other girls who does this. And you would think that like, oh, it's like a joke. It's like, haha, like how much of a loser you could be. And he's like, oh, no, man, I'm not subscribed to her. I'm not buying her OnlyFans, but I am buying an other girl's OnlyFans. And they're like, oh, okay. And so it's just like treated as like totally normal. And the host, the other male host is clearly not like a loser. He's like a 20-year-old kid who's hosting a Barstool thing. And he's like a skinny guy, but he's been on TV and stuff. He's like not a loser at all, like you would say. I mean, this guy probably has no trouble getting women. I can tell you that. And this guy is just like casually buying OnlyFans. It's just treated as like the normal thing that Zoomers do. And you're like, what? And it's just so outrageous. And then you have like a breath of fresh air coming from Andrew Tate, even though Andrew Tate, like one of the things they talk about is, and it's not total breath of fresh air, because he does talk about like OnlyFans in the context of saying that if your girlfriend is on OnlyFans, the male should take the profit because he needs to give her permission. And you should have been saying, I mean, the correct answer would obviously be is like, if your girlfriend should not be on OnlyFans at all if you're dating her, but it's better. And then they were upset. They're like, why would the boyfriend be owned any of the profits? Like, how dare that? No, it's all her money. And so that was not like the best aspect of it, but it was just him talking about like gender realism in a way that they just could not understand. And Portnoy was like really just like, oh, I don't believe that. I think women are just as intelligent. Actually, in a lot of ways, they're smarter. And just like, just Tate was giving them the things. He's like, well, it's like I can't do the Tate voice. He's got a strange voice, but he's like talking about the bell curve. He's like, men are at the both sides of the bell curve, like extremely stupid and extremely smart, while women are more likely to be in the middle of the bell curve. And this is like talking point just like went over the heads of all over the hosts, the Barstool hosts, and it was just like, what? And it was like this. And so going to the point of just like me investigating Barstool and like its culture, and there's been this popularity of what Barstool conservative means. I think the Barstool conservative, it was invented by, it was come up by Matthew Walther, who's like this, tries to be an idiosyncratic Catholic conservative who, he's very much in the post-liberal thing. Is like, we need a working class movement. We need like socialism, but based. And he's always very critical of these various trends on the right and like libertarianism and stuff. He coined this phrase to essentially say it's a conservatism. It's Trumpism, but it doesn't even care about social conservatism at all. It's like, it doesn't care about abortion and gay rights. It's just concerned about the kind of culture war issues that Trump elevated through like immigration, critical race theory, political correctness, censorship. That's the type of stuff he came up with. And a better representative of that a better way to say that is Andrew Tate conservatism, because that is what Andrew Tate is. Like, Andrew Tate gave an interview. He's like, I don't really care about social issues. What I care about is immigration, free speech, and nationalism. That's the stuff I care about in demographics. And that's what we're seeing a lot in certain traits of conservatism, even though it's being mixed in still with what the remnants of the religious right. And we've seen that in a bunch of different races throughout the country. But there is this growing sense of Barstool conservatism, even though it's might not the best moniker for that, because Barstool itself is not Barstool conservative. The only really right-wing personality is Portnoy. And Portnoy got on air to say that he's a single-issue voter and it's abortion, and he's going to vote straight Democrat because of the Supreme Court overthrowing abortion, or overthrowing Roe v. Wade. A single issue. And like, conservatives absolutely love Dave Portnoy. And they were still upset about that, but they still like Dave Portnoy because conservatives just love sports. I mean, they're sports simps at heart, and they really can't give up on it. And they really like that because it's giving them a sense of being normal and being connected with American pastimes. And they cannot, and no matter how woke sports get, I like watching a lot of sports, but I do realize that it's like propaganda and it's opiate of the masses. And conservatives just won't admit this, and they will never admit this at all, and they won't refuse to give it up. And they do like Portnoy because he's like symbol of cool, and even though he is living a lifestyle that they would all deplore, especially on the right-wing Twitter sphere, he's a unmarried 45-year-old man. He's like sexually promiscuous. He cares about abortion. He's just living in what you would say a degenerate lifestyle. they still love him anyway because he's like a cool guy. I mean, and granted, he probably is a very affable person. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but there's more standards there. But all the other Barstool personalities are very left-wing. And they've not even just left-wing, but there's like disgusting aspects about Barstools. There is a podcast dedicated solely to OnlyFans called OnlyStans. And it's hosted by a morbidly obese man with the last name Balls. I kid you not. The Balls might be a pseudonym. They all take on pseudonyms like Big Cat, PFD commentator, Chaps. They all. I think Portnoy might be one of the few who doesn't take on a pseudonym. So they always take on pseudonyms. So it might be a pseudonym. I didn't investigate thoroughly enough, but that's that. And all the other big Barstool commentators and personalities are all leftists or liberals like Big Cat and PFT, and they go on Chapo and they occasionally get politically correct. This guy Chaps is really left wing. I don't know how big he is, but some people were telling me about him, and he's openly championing how one of his kids is transgender. And the kid's like 5 or 6. He always goes on threads about how Republicans are fascist and are wanting to kill transgender children and just like outrageous stuff like that. And so it's like the Barstool itself is not Barstool conservative. Like they don't even, at most they have Dave Portnoy, who's kind of a libertarian, and he's cool with Tucker. He's cool with Trump. He hates taxes. He hates paying more with that. He doesn't like political correctness. He doesn't like wokeness, even if he may disagree with like people. Like even in his Andrew Tate interview, he was trying to say like, well, I disagree with you, but I don't really have a problem with you saying this stuff. And I think I'm going to let you speak and being called a sexist and misogynist. Like, I'm not going to outright condemn you. But even then, he would just like saying, well, that would be sexist and stuff. And it's like, okay, but he still is like opposed to political correctness. But on anything else, like I'm sure he's like pro-immigration. He may think BLM goes too far, but I mean, his main goals is just making money and partying. Maybe not the worst things to aspire to, but that is like what he represents. And so it's not like Barstool conservatism. It'd be more accurate to call it Andrew Tate conservatism because he does represent a different angle. The difference is that Tate doesn't come off as the average Ameribro. Tate, even though he was a professional athlete, a kickboxer, he's not like talking about sports. He's not talking about the big game and stuff. He's just talking about like dating techniques and like how to make money. And then he occasionally goes into politics, and he's like strongly anti-vax too. Very strongly anti-vax. So most of like any dissident right position, like Tate upholds, but it's not like his core focus, which is not the case with Dave Portnoy. Portnoy, on the other hand, typically is a cultural libertarian, not like this way that they were using it in 2016, but I think a truly emblematic of it is like he's liberal on social issues, conservative on fiscal policy, but generally just doesn't like political correctness and was cool with Tucker Carlson and Trump. And he is like an affable guy who people want to party with and like have a beer with. And like I understand that. And some people use that as like a reason for why Portnoy is better. Like I was discussing this matter with some people, and they were just talking about how awesome Portnoy is and how awesome sports is. And he's like, Portnoy, he's just a cool guy, man. He just goes in and could just like be friends with anyone. And that's why he's better than Tate. And it's like, that's not the standard we should have for like what type of content we want to young men to watch. And if you're having to choose, I think like putting Barstool and Tate on the same level is a way of competing with them. They're not necessarily the same, but like looking at like the way like male behavior should be shaped and should be emulated, you could say that these two are like the big poles of young male behavior, what they want to look up to. I would say Tate is like far better. You're going to get far more truth from Tate, and it's not going to just be centered entirely around sports. Like there is nothing wrong with watching a few games, and I'm not like one of those people who are just like, you need to oppose all sports watching. Like there are some sports you can get that don't have wokeness, and maybe if you're just like watching one game, but like this sports fan culture has really degenerated over time, and you cannot say that like, oh, you can enjoy it and be really into sports and not avoid it. Like, conservatives don't really want to address how like cringe and terrible sports fan culture is. And especially now, it's like people talk about like, oh, Andrew Tate's into degeneracy and stuff. It's like, all sports now is centered around betting. It's like gambling was generally frowned upon by, devout Christians for a long time, but now betting is that's all sports fandom is centered around, is betting, is gambling, due to the popularity of now like FanDuel and DraftKings and all these type of platforms that allow guys to do sports betting easily. And that's what all this is about. And that's what all that is getting, and that's all that like Barstool is promoting, is like just get involved. And like the type of manhood promoted by Barstool is like the highest aspirations you need to have are winning your fantasy football league, and that's it. And making money through sports betting. And like the type of, and all the other people on Barstool, particularly the guys, are just so disgusting. They're like all fat. They are all fat. Like you'd think that like, they're sports guys who are just like jacked and looking like, Chads, and like, no, they're all fat. They all have double chins except for Portnoy, but Portnoy is really short. I mean, it's the same on ESPN where all their non-black males on there are total dorks. And I guess you wouldn't say that these guys are dorks on Barstool. There are really a lot of these guys are dudes who were athletes maybe when they were in high school, but have just decided to get fat over time. I knew a lot of guys from like high school and college who were like that. They were like really athletic. And now I look at them and they got double chins. They're fat. They just given up. And so that's like a lot of, I mean, they do look like their audience. I will say that. They do resemble their audience, but it's rather with Andrew Tate, who's like promoting working out, that's like a big part of his thing. He's not, the highest aspiration is not, being like the top of your fantasy football league. It is about improving yourself. Now, you may disagree with how you improve yourself, but it is about being independent of the matrix and about being independently financially. And I don't know if Hustlers U is the best way to achieve that, but at least the ideal that he stresses is far superior than Barstool, which is just like getting drunk, watching football, and like getting fat. And that's like what like Barstool is all about. And maybe that's like, oh, that's what normal America is like. Well, that is. And that's going to my point of just like how far out like our Twitter sphere is like how much of a bubble our Twitter sphere is from normie America. And you have to remember, Barstool is the non-woke alternative to sports media. It is less heinous than ESPN and Deadspin. Deadspin will have like talking about how you need to love transgender athletes in women's sports. It's extremely left wing. If you turn on ESPN, it's like Black Power Hour with every show. Like they always have like a new show which is like all black hosts, and they're just like talking about like racism in America. Like, oh, I'm tired of racism. And it's like, I'm trying to watch like a sports here. I'm trying to get sports news, not be told, not get a Black Lives Matter lecture. And so you'll turn on ESPN and it's like Black Power Hour, and they get like ugly women to go on to talk about how they need to respect women. One thing I would say about Barstool is at least most of their female personalities are at least still attractive, even though not all of them. Like on this episode where they had with BFFs, like I was about to like criticize the young kid who was on there, but then I realized like 20 years old. I mean, he's like really skinny and stuff, but he's kind of wiggerish, but he's like standard Zoomer. But the two women on there with it, it's like one girl you could definitely tell has like an insanely high body count, is run through, and like I looked up her personality, and it's like always talking about how she's like hungover all the time, and she's wearing a hat, and she's like clearly like probably had a rough night, and it's like a Tuesday. And then the other girl was like fat and like not attractive in the least, and it's just like, wow, this is really base bro programming. And another thing I realized about Barstool is that a lot of their female personalities are on OnlyFans. Like he was discussing this with these two girls on OnlyFans, and these two girls, they add on, I think they host a show called Mean Girls. I don't know the full details. Once again, this is not the most thorough research, but it's I did some research, and I'm watching this show, and he's talking about how they're both on OnlyFans. So both these girls are not like the girl who was in on BFFs, the podcast with Andrew Tate, who looks like run through just hungover. These look like, if you didn't know anything about them, they look like nice girls that are just there. They're perky. They're just like, oh yeah, that's like, I'm so excited for my boxing match. I'm so excited for this. And just the way they talk, it's like standard girls, the standard white girls. And they're both talking about how they're making money on OnlyFans. And what they try to say is like, well, we're not doing any type of pornography. It's no different than what we post on Instagram. It's just like beach shots, bikini shots, and I just like talk with my fans because they're so lonely. And they're just like, hey, good morning, how are you? And I just say good morning back. And they're just, in the way they talk about it, it's like, and I so support this because it gives me the opportunity to take this great vacation, and it gives me more money to live the lifestyle I want in New York City. And it's more of a problem that, like, this is how the average white American woman thinks, rather than like these are particularly bad girls, because these girls are like above average, I would say, for American women. I would probably put them well above average because they're thin and good looking, and they don't like, just looking at them, they didn't feel like the degeneracy was just like just emanating from them, like the other girls on the two other girls who are on the other podcast, where you just tell like this girl, like the good looking one was was major trouble. And you're seeing these two girls, so you'd seen this, and then like Portnoy's only problem with them being on OnlyFans is that it takes away from them doing Barstool content, and they may make so much money from OnlyFans is that then that would cost the company's time and effort. Now, this clip could never exist in the right-wing Twitter sphere. Like, the whole conversation would just be like a horrifying ordeal. And like me watching it, like the whole time I'm watching this podcast, I'm like, oh my dear Lord, like this is normie America. And then just the way, the casual way they're describing these subjects and everything of that sort, it's just, wow, it's like, this is how they think. You know, it really makes you feel like you've just entered a foreign country and you're watching their TV network and you're like, what? Like different culture norms and stuff. And it's like, it's so funny that you hear them talking about this as like casual. Then like in our Twitter bubble, if you admit that you've held hands with your girlfriend, you may be or if you even have a girlfriend, you may be fit for being canceled. You know, it's like completely different spheres of how life, you know, and watching like Barstool really does show you how like completely foreign we are from a lot of like normie America at our age group. Like, I think people, elderly people who are like conservative, like Gen X and Boomer conservatives, they would have been like weirded out by this stuff. But like millennial and Zoomers, like the young people that we're with, you know, they view Barstool as like normiedom, and it's also, as I said, the non-woke alternative to normiedom. Normies, our sports program, along with Outkick. Outkick is generally I feel is like for an older audience, just based on the writers. Like anytime I read any of their articles, most of the writers look like they're Gen X or like geriatric millennials, and it seems much more geared to an older audience with Outkick. I mean, especially with going on Fox News. More Gen X and Boomers than the millennial and Zoomer audience of Barstool. It's also much more political, but Outkick is fine. They have some really good political articles on there. Whenever they talk about politics, it's generally something that most of us would agree with. Not the case with Barstool. So I was just like looking at this, and so looking at Barstool and how it is. You know, it reinforces my point about how Andrew Tate is far better than any of the other type of media that a lot of young people are going to consume outside of like Tucker or like the explicitly political stuff. Like non-explicitly political stuff, you're hard pressed to find, unless it's like devoutly Christian content, you're hard pressed to find better content that is going to give them positive messages, mixed with some negative stuff, of course, but the type of truth, you're not going to see that in other type of content outside of Andrew Tate. And compared to stuff like Barstool, which is, once again, as I keep reiterating, the non-woke alternative to sports programming, is far superior than that. And it just reiterating a lot of points, is that this reinforces how Tate is superior than any possible alternatives that may be out there. Another thing is it really reinforces this notion of how horrible sports fandom is at the moment. Like, it is just so bad that this is how. I mean, normies are always going to be like this. It's not, you're always going to imagine that, like, normies should be reading Schopenhauer and engaging in and only listening to classical music and stuff. Like, that's just not going to happen. They're always going to want to be into their, like, entertainment and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with necessarily having sports as a hobby and following along and being into it. But just like the culture around it, like with all the problems we have in the world today, and it really does. I keep using the word reinforce, but maybe I'll try to use a different word. But it does fortify my position on how we're just not going to have a civil war. It's like all the young men with like any type of vitality and like the type of behavior and masculine behavior to like want to overthrow the government or do something like that or make a change or separate. They're all just like focused in on their fantasy league. They're all just focused in on the game. They're not like, they zone out all the problems. They may see some of these problems, but they'll come back, watch Barstool, watch the game, and everything will be fine. And that's like their main interest and hobby. And it's probably even more positive and affirming for their life than maybe getting doomed, getting blackpilled about politics. They just rather focus on sports. And there are millions and millions of Americans like this. They all tune into the big game. Like, this is what happens. I remember there was like one time, there was some incident that people were talking about as like, this is going to be the Civil War. This is like the act. I think it was something about, this is last year. So it was like, I think there was like an announcement of like Trump, some new Trump investigation or something that like, this is it. This is how it's going to go down. And then I looked at the Twitter trending topic, and what was outweighing it was the fact that the first game of the NFL season, that was the main trending topic. And even among conservatives, they had been talking about like, oh, this is it. This is like the real thing. Like this could lead to violence. And then immediately they're like, touchdown! Woo! You know, eventually they just ignored it. Like, this is what they'll happen. Like, maybe they'll get upset, but game's on. We're just going to focus on the game. And maybe that's like better for their mental health, or I guess. But like, the sports, both good and bad, when I'm saying this, is the opiate of the masses. It is how they keep loyalty. I mean, if you wanted to keep a stable society that was orderly and was not prone to revolt, you would encourage sports fandom culture, because all it's about is just caring deeply about this big game, how you can bet on it, whether you can win the bet on the game, how your players are doing on your fantasy league. And it just keeps people preoccupied from ever worrying about big issues. They may just be upset about something they see on the news or whatever, but when it comes time to it, or what they're going to focus their attention on, they're going to be more likely to focus their attention on their fantasy league. I even saw a clip of this that was being sent around. It was like a TikTok clip. It was like partially, you know, it was supposed to be a funny clip. And it's this like guy, I guess he's like a college kid, probably in a fraternity. And he's like telling his girlfriend, is like, hey girl, I got to tell you some bad news. I'm not going to be seeing you a lot this week when football season's on. It's like every Sunday, I'm not going to see you. Got to watch the games all the time. Also Monday, Thursday, and sometimes Saturday. It's all a game. Fantasy's my main thing. And it's like a way, he's probably like joking around, but there is like a lot of guys like that. It's like during football season, that's their whole time. So if we, you know, maybe civil war, national divorce happen, you're going to have to call it off during football season, because all these guys that you're going to have to depend on to, you know, man the trenches or whatever, they're all manning their fantasy football trenches instead. And I mean, you can't eliminate that at all. Like, people are all, you're not going to expect like a whole mass movement to, I don't know, reading philosophy or history or whatnot. They're going to be focused on more earthly passions, you could say. But it's like looking at that for our side. Conservatives really got to get over this sports simping. It really does tie people to just the prevailing status quo and accepting the new order and new changes, because what's really important is getting them back to watching the game. And people make all these types of excuses like, oh, it supports like a positive civic identity. It's like, really? Like, oh yeah, you're out. If you ever look at these large crowds like gathered for the professional football teams, like Super Bowl parade, you're just like, really these people, it's like there's like a pathetic aspect. Like the only sports fans that I see, like, and I look at the crowd and I feel like, oh, these are nice people. It's like college football games where it's like nice middle class white people. Professional golf, both the Live League and at PGA. You look at it's nice white people dressed up, dressed well, look like good people that you want to spend time with. I mean, I don't like pro golf is incredibly boring. So with tennis and a couple of other things. But if you scan the crowd at an NFL game, you get, if you're not like get a kind of deep sense of disenchantment and disillusionment from it, you're a normie. And so it's the same with like me saying like that comment. If you, depending on whether you agree or disagree with the comment that sports is the opiate of the masses, will say that you're a normie. And I always see like our side is like always obsessed with the normies and like worshiping them and imagining that they're secretly based and ready to rise up, and they're just like and some people just say like, well, you just guys are just too weird on this aspect, or you alienating normies from this perspective. And like I'm like, turn on Barstool Sports, watch some Barstool's podcasts, and you'll see what normie America is really like, and then you'll learn, oh, okay, maybe they aren't secretly based. I mean, they could maybe be made more keyed, more right wing, more aware of these issues. But at their stance that they're now, it is like last man syndrome, as like Nietzsche is talking about. They give us this last man. All these guys are just like the last man, sitting on their couch, watching the game, watching their beer gut grow. They may have been an athlete in high school, but they're no more. And they're just solely obsessed with their fantasy league and sports betting, and it's no way to be. It's no way how we really need to avoid that if we're going to try to change the world. You cannot change the world if you have a fantasy league. If you're involved in a fantasy league, I'm sorry to say, but conservatives really like that, and I think it's specifically those who are involved professionally in politics, they really like it because they really want the impression that they're a normie, down home, or a Maribro guy, and they really gravitate towards this. So they almost adopt it more enthusiastically and more exaggerated than the average American, because there's a desperation to get that image. And it's not just conservatives; it's like also irony leftists are all into this stuff now. I got like attacked and almost ratio, but not quite, by irony leftists last year when I was making fun of these weirdos for watching sports and pretending that they're normal bros, and they're clearly not. And they continue to do this. It's like, man, why aren't you just like having a beer and watching the game with your they them bros, man? Why aren't you doing that? And that's like the irony leftists. So they're all excessively into this stuff. And Chapo now has Barstool personalities on their podcast. It's not, hating sports is not a leftist liberal thing anymore as it was before. I mean, there's still like some maybe snooty liberals like NPR listeners who don't watch sports, but the irony leftists are all into it, and those are like the ones who are the worst. And you have those type of people into it, and so everyone's just like gravitate towards it. And after the pandemic and like BLM, and even despite all the woke propaganda, all the sports viewership is reaching record numbers and is higher than it was before, probably in large part due to sports betting, I think. But that's what's happening. So you really got to avoid sports culture. I do. There's a fine line between like sports ball and like that contemptuous behavior and like a healthy attitude towards like, sports skepticism. I think you should avoid the word sports ball or just like the outright contempt. I mean, it's hard not to have contempt for this. I mean, when I watch look at fans, but you can't celebrate it. You can't celebrate it. And you got to avoid like the normie idolization that some on the right want to gravitate towards. Just watch Barstool to get that. And that's a lot of reasons why I like Tate, is that he is not a normie. He is not like a normie idolization. He is not encouraging people to pretend to be like average Joe and think that this is like the greatest thing you can be, like a grill American, as some on the right does. He is not an average American. He never tries to pretend to be that way. He is something different, and I think it is good for people to break out of the like grill American mindset and to look and to gravitate towards content that is going to give them another perspective. And one final point about Andrew Tate I want to say is that a funny thing about him is that he is like the multiracial working class. And it's funny that all the people who really, really hate Andrew Tate are the ones who are most obsessed with the multiracial working class element. Like, this is a guy who is himself multiracial. A lot of his fans are black and Hispanic. He has like a lot of interviews with black and Hispanic guys who are just like, oh man, that's a good point, bro. And they're like, yeah. And so it's like he's getting along. He'll be talking about like immigration and stuff. And the black guy will be like, yo, that'd be dope. I get that. And it's like, they all like that. They also, he promises is kind of like materialist, like rapper lifestyle, like getting your Bugatti and stuff and like wearing nice stuff. And that's really a lot of what the working class is. It's like they don't want to just be poor their whole time. They want to have an aspirational lifestyle where they can have nice stuff. And, you know, Tate promises that, and both it's positive and negative qualities with that. And there's also a clip I watched where this guy was interviewing all these, like pretty much all of them were non-white, and they were interviewing about Andrew Tate, and like these Hispanic guys like, yo, that my hombre, I like that guy. And then like the women are like, I don't like him. And then they talk about him saying like how the differences between when men and women wreck a car. And then all the women were like, oh, he actually has a point, because he was like, women don't want to be held responsible for any of their behavior, while men will come out to their bro and be like, how can I pay for this and stuff? And women are just like, nope, that's your fault. It's not my fault. And so he does present a lot of truths that other people don't want to talk about because it's like politically incorrect and controversial to say. And he gets them out there. Whether he is like the embodiment of the multiracial working class, I don't know. That might be just a little bit of a joke, but he's closer to it than the people who claim that they represent the multiracial working class. Like tweed wearing nerds who are into obscure theological texts and stuff. That's not the multiracial working class. Andrew Tate is much more the multiracial class than Compact Magazine and First Things. And that's just a fact that they need to acknowledge. So that's my conclusion on it. Probably going to be a very controversial take. If anyone who ever tries to say anything nice about Andrew Tate, you get like people just frothing in the mouth. But that's like the same with all my takes, is that, you know, whenever I'm being attacked for presenting new ideas, it's like my motto every day. And that's the same here. So you don't have to love him. You can surely see that a lot of his aspects are negative or degenerate. But you have to admit, from coming from the perspective of what the ordinary person is going to see on TikTok and the messaging and media that is brainwashing people on a daily basis, Andrew Tate is a breath of fresh air from that. Of course, he's not perfect, but no one is. And it was the same with Trump. Is like, you know, Trump wasn't the perfect candidate either, but he turned out to be the best thing we had. So it's the same. I think this is the same with Andrew Tate with TikTok phenomenon. He is not the perfect TikTok phenomenon, but he's the best we have. So I'm going to conclude that. I had a little bit of an aside, but this has already been a very long podcast, so I'm going to save that for another day. So that is it for Highly Respected today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We're going to have a terrific IQ supplement later this week, so tune into that. So until next time, stay respected.